Hello, and welcome to Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. We're coming to you live from the downtown studios of Edge Media here in downtown Indianapolis. Well, the 2019 legislative session just a few weeks away, and lots of issues for Indiana lawmakers to dissect through. And so joining us is our panel of our good political friends, Libertarian Lindsey Marie, Adam Wren of Importantville, Democrat Lara Back, and radio talk show host Rob Kendall. So thank you all very, very much. Hope you all had a good Turkey Day and all that other fun stuff.
Yes.
I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I know my family too. So let's go ahead and get started here. Well, Indiana lawmakers came back right before Thanksgiving for Organization Day. Like I said, lots of issues, one of which is a possibility of a hate or bias crimes legislation. Republicans actually offering up two bills. State Senator Ron Alting on the Senate side of things, and State Representative Tony Cook of Cicero offered up a measure on the Republican side of things in the House. So, Lindsey, let me start with you. Do we see hate crimes legislation pass, or for that matter, does Indiana need one?
I think in the past they've tried to pass it, and it's been very unsuccessful. A hate crimes bill is something that you can take back to your district and sound like you've done something. And if you come out vocally and oppose it, it kind of makes you sound terrible. So you almost get guilted into voting for it. To be honest, though, as a libertarian, I believe in all rights for everyone all the time, no questions asked, which also means equal application of the law and also equal justice. So when we start carving out certain circumstances, what that does is it says a crime in this certain circumstance isn't as bad, or that person wasn't treated as bad as somebody else. And I think once we start doing that, that's when we start getting a justice system that's not exactly fair anymore.
Does this really matter, Adam? Or was most important isn't so much that there's a hate crime statute, but also some more along the lines of how it's actually done. Is it a separate offense, as some lawmakers want it, or is it sort of an aggravating, sort of sentence enhancer, mitigating factor like we already do for people with disabilities, senior citizens, children, sort of the heinousness of the crime, that sort of thing?
I think state leaders, economic officials are really anxious to get rid of that talking point that Indiana is one of 5 states without a hate crime bill law, and so I think that that's going to make it a front of mind issue. I was struck by how Speaker Brian Bosma said just before Thanksgiving that if things turned into a RFRA type situation with this, that it might be a no-go this year.
And partly, Bri, I think the reason why he would say that is because the Republican base for years hasn't wanted this. And so the Republicans have had a supermajority for, I've sort of lost track, but they've had the supermajority, and every opportunity they kill it. And so there are some new faces in the legislature. There's a little bit more parity, I think, in terms of especially the Democrat House members. But at the same time, they've got to be the ones to push it through. And if it fails because of them, not because of anybody else.
Rob Kendall, you've never been a big fan of hate crimes legislation, but is there a difference between a separate offense versus, like I said, a mitigating factor like we already do in certain instances?
Well, I just take the governor at his word when he says no law can stop evil. I mean, that's his word, right? So if Governor Holcomb believes law can stop evil.
That didn't take long.
I didn't say it, he did.
About 3 minutes into the show, we're already going after the governor.
So if the governor believes no law can stop evil, the question has to be, what are we doing here? Why are we doing this? And until they can answer that question, I don't see what the point of this is. That's the governor's words directly from his mouth. Nobody made him say it. No law can stop evil.
But something I did think was interesting, just having some conversations with some members of the African-American community, is they seem almost a little upset that because they've been pushing for hate and bias crimes for years, and it didn't get anywhere. But then someone vandalized the synagogue, and now we have to do something, and now we have to sort of tackle this. So I thought that was a little bit of an interesting dynamic. Not that they don't support it, but people are a little upset that, hey, we've been pushing this forever. No one cared. Nobody seemed to listen. But now something happens to wealthier people up in Carmel, and now everybody's in a little bit of a tizzy.
And you're looking at me like this because
you look like you're about to say something.
I'm not going to. You said it for me. I didn't have to say it.
But even pulling back the camera and looking at the national landscape right now, we've seen hate crimes increase over the last 2 years nationwide. So in a lot of ways, wherever it's happening, Indiana is not unique in that respect. What makes us unique is that we are only one of 5 states that doesn't have legislation addressing it.
Liz, let me jump on that the libertarian concept, because one of the things you do here is, hey, if you obviously have committed a crime against somebody, you don't like them, and we're treating people separately. But I guess the question is, are we really treating people differently if we're attacked because race is a motivating factor or gender, religion? It doesn't matter what it is, as long as that is a motivating factor, in the attack. And Like I said, if you look at what Republicans are talking about, it's just basically a sentence enhancer. You still had to be convicted of the underlying crime, which is, knocking Abdul upside the head with a baseball bat, which probably wouldn't be a crime in some places, depending on who you talk to.
I think it depends on what they're trying to achieve. If they're trying to achieve justice, most of this, if it's just going to be an enhancement, justice would have already been achieved because the law's already in the books that you can't assault someone, you can't murder someone. When you keep going with this farther and farther, is it vengeance or is it justice? And that's where we have to look and be serious about what are we trying to do with this and ask what outcomes do we want. Laws are supposed to deter crimes, but we know that hate crime bills typically don't deter hate crimes. No one really stops and says, before I go do this, how many years can I go to prison for? They don't do that, right? So is this justice or is this vengeance?
Yeah, and to piggyback on what she said, do you think those morons who drew the swastika on the synagogue have any idea what a hate crime is? Does anybody think that they know what a sentence enhancement is? This isn't going to stop anything. And again, it comes back to if it's not going to stop it, if it's not going to prevent it, it's pretty sad that our legislators now are just passing things based on how does this play back at home.
But that's the whole point then. But no law is ever going to deter the bad guy because that's just the very nature of bad guys. Right. So does that mean we should get rid of any and all laws whatsoever and have the world turn into a Thunderdome?
Well, I'm just putting on taking a different
which you'd love,
from
by
it.
the way.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, definitely. I'm taking a little bit of a different tact on it. I think that having some type of sentencing enhancement, for example, what it does do is it does send a very strong message because prosecutors can use these in cases of gangs. For instance, Prosecutor Curry, he has used the racketeering statutes, for example, on gangs, which normally you don't do. So it does allow for more of a creative prosecutorial tactic, which can actually be really helpful long term down the road. But again, let's back up. It also kind of goes back to what you said. I can't even believe we're going back together here, Rob. But
you seem so appalled.
It's a new day. It's a new day for all of us. But the Republicans really have to have the political will to get this done. And if they don't have the political will to get this done, it's not going to happen.
You're watching Indiana Issues, the weekly public affairs program where we try to go through the majors of the day, come to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Talk about some of the issues facing Indiana lawmakers when they come back in 2019. The budget. Although the economy is doing well, Indiana has a surplus. Indiana may have some budget issues. This upcoming session, lawmakers expecting less than $400 million in new revenue. Adam, they got DCS needs a lot more money. We're talking about teacher pay. Is this going to be a tight budget year, even though we do have, quote unquote, more money in the bank?
And not only that, but they have sort of a new crew of lawmakers who are going to be making those tough decisions. So it'll be an interesting time. I actually worked in the legislature here in Indiana before I went to journalism school. So seeing it on the inside and how it works, it always seems like a tough budget year. There's never a budget year where people are like, "Oh, we've got money for everybody." So some of the language sounds familiar to me about cautioning, and we're a thrifty state by nature. A lot of fiscal conservatives, even on the Democratic side of the aisle. So I think they'll work it out.
Well, the running joke is Luke Kendall, former Senate Appropriations Chairman Luke Kendall, used to always tell everybody, "No, we're broke. We don't have any money until it looks like we had a little bit." So people kind of scale back. Rob, should we be concerned about the state's financial situation?
Well, they've raised taxes 46 times in 2 years. Right?
Well, that didn't take long.
Who was that did that?
The Republican Party is the tax and spend party now, right? I mean, there's not a tax increase they won't put on the table, and we're seeing it again with the cigarette tax this year. They will find a revenue source to fund whatever pet project that is. What people need to be aware of, though, is that the Republicans in Indiana are doing exactly to local governments what they decry the federal government from doing to them, which is finger wagging, saying we know best. And Brian Bosma did it just the other day when he said, "I'm going to figure out how to get teacher pay myself because local school boards are essentially too stupid to figure it out."
But is it a matter of that, Lindsey? Like I said, looking at just going to the whole issue of teacher pay, and that's again going to be once again a budgetary issue. Is this one of those things where the state can actually increase teacher pay without dipping into the state coffers by saying, "Hey, look, 60% of your school budget is going toward administration at the classroom. You as a school district got to figure out how to get more money, to teachers."
It's going to depend on how much backlash they're getting. But if they want to find money somewhere, they're going to find it, and they're going to reappropriate it and move little things around to where then the roads go to hell real fast, but the teachers have a lot of money, but the school buses are going to get flat tires from driving the kids to school on them. I mean, it doesn't matter if they can't find it in the right general fund or where it's supposed to come from. They'll find it somewhere or they'll make you pay for it.
So what is the role going to be for Democrats in this whole process? Because, like you said, like Adam just said, we have a lot of new faces. Ryan Mishler taking over appropriations. Todd Houston's going to be co-chairing Ways and Means while Dr. Tim Brown recovers from his motorcycle accident. And just like I said, and also not to mention we have almost 30 new lawmakers all together who are new to this process.
Yeah, but I also think let's take a step back though and look at this from a more global perspective. Not to echo Rob again, but
boy, twice in the first 10 minutes.
It's a holiday season. Trust me.
I know.
This will be gone by the January white sale.
This will be gone soon. We're going to enjoy this moment.
I think we're seeing our unity ticket.
I do. I think here we go. But look, we need more caseworkers. Our teachers do have to be paid more money, and that what's fascinating about the teacher, the teacher pay movement, are the people behind it. And you've got people from different side of the aisle, like Rob and I, who are working together to get that done. But in Indiana, we brag about our low corporate tax rate, but we have cut corporate taxes to the point where we don't have a revenue stream, for example. So every time you say, oh, here, we're going to do some corporate welfare for you, we're going to do corporate welfare for you, that means less money that's coming into the state. And so if that's the approach you're going to take, you're not going to have that revenue. And so again, when you've got these supermajorities, you're running on this is the challenge that they have.
You're watching Indiana Issues, coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Our guests today are Libertarian Lindsey Marie, Adam Wren, writer of Importantville and also contributes to Politico Indianapolis Monthly, Democrat and political consultant Lara Back, and radio talk show host conservative Rob Kendall. Another big item that lawmakers may or may not have to deal with, depending on how it boils down to, is impossible initiation of impeachment proceedings against the Attorney General, Curtis Hill. And full disclosure, the Attorney General and I have known each other forever, friends. His office advertises with my political website, so no big shocker. It's been out there forever. But House Democrats have introduced a plan next year that would call for impeachment proceedings. Ed Delaney telling us in the media that, hey, this would just simply be to get the truth out, not necessarily know where it would go. House Speaker Brian Bosma saying if impeachment would basically consume every waking moment of the legislature and nothing would get done. Lara Back, is this a road that lawmakers should go down?
Well, I think it's a road that we're already down at this point in time. I don't think that there's any way to pull it back at this point. And it's fascinating that that's the approach from Speaker Bosma when he has his whole own host of issues out there. I think Mike Murphy said last week it all reads like a cheap novel. And, there's Mike Murphy for you on that one. But so you're going into this climate where you've got there's also now a civil lawsuit that's going to be out against the Attorney General. So you've got that going on. You've got Brian Bosma with his issues. You've got new members. You've got the Ethics Commission. You've got sexual harassment training. None of this is going away. And the challenge that Curtis Hill has is that, yes, they may pull back on the impeachment, the Republicans may, but they've already all called for him to resign. And the court of public opinion is also a very, very powerful court as well outside of the law. So I don't think it's going away, and I don't think you can put the brakes on it at this point.
Rob, is a impeachment proceeding against the Attorney General a valuable use of lawmakers' time with all the other issues they have to deal with next session?
Well, if it keeps them from doing anything else, maybe. But this is ridiculous, right? I mean, the guy has been...
you put a jacket on this guy, and this is what you get.
I was going to say, my dad will be like Rob Kendall for governor. My dad's going to be like, who is that guy? I like him.
So you've got an ethics investigation, which the inspector general, who's appointed by the governor, who told him to resign, said there was no ethics violation. You got a special prosecutor, and by the way, everybody says the guy's creepy. Probably true. But there's no criminal charges. So if you didn't commit an ethics violation, you didn't commit criminal charge, you didn't commit something that rises to a level of a crime, what do we have here? The problem becomes, once again, these guys, whether it's Connie Lawson or Susan Brooks or Eric Holcomb or Brian Bosma, the moral high horse finger-wagging stuff has painted them into a corner where if you believe this guy has to resign, then how could you not believe he's impeached? Because that's a forced resignation.
That's a great point. That's an excellent point, actually.
But Lindsey, I think Rob makes a very salient point here. There is no ethics violation. The special prosecutor, Dan Ziegler, simply said, hey, you know what? I could bring charges, but as prosecutor, I can only bring what I have a reasonable chance of proving. So guess what? So there's no criminal conviction. You have a civil lawsuit, which I would argue as an attorney is as specious at best if you really start digging into the weeds and the brass tacks of this thing. So what is there really to impeach the attorney general on under the law? You may not like the guy, but you know what? That's why we have elections.
I don't think that they'd be doing it to actually impeach him. I think they'd be doing it for theatrics and to sort of give it to the Republicans. It's going to drag his name through the mud along with a lot of other people, and that's going to be good for the Democrats coming in 2019 and 2020. I don't think a lot of them believe they're actually going to bring him down. It's more of what they're going to put him through for the next so many months and the damage they can do in the meantime.
I think all of this is really, if you step back, a case for modernizing Indiana's government in terms of looking at whether or not to make the legislature a full-time legislature. Because when you have a part-time legislature, the idea for that is you have people who are experts at trade and experts at agriculture, and they can bring that into the legislature. But what really happens when you have a part-time legislature is that the body of knowledge rests with lobbyists and interests. And, whenever something like this comes up with Curtis Hill, the argument is we don't have enough time to look at it. We only have a limited amount of time to get a budget done. And also I think where we're moving to is to have a lot of these cabinet positions be appointed, whether it's, the superintendent of public instruction or the attorney general, because that way that solves some of these problems. These people are accountable to an elected governor and administration, and they serve at the pleasure of Eric Holcomb or whoever the governor happens.
Can I piggyback on what he said real quick?
Sure.
Because he's absolutely right. It's pathetic. Not what you're saying is pathetic, but it's pathetic that you're right, that you've got guys that are making between $50 and $70,000 a year for part-time work, and yet they go, well, we're not a full-time legislature. We can't be experts.
Right.
Then don't sign up for the job. I mean, we have a lot of...
I think that's a convenient excuse, though.
Well,
no one wants to tackle this. I mean, what is so fascinating from the political theater standpoint of this allegation came out, the multiple allegations came out against him, and most people would step down. Well, he didn't step down, and everyone now has called for him to step down. And now you're going into a civil case where a lot of folks are going to be deposed in this. A lot of folks are going to be, their stories are going to be told. So this is just, whether the Democrats want to drag it on or not, it is going to drag on. And so it puts the speaker, who himself is battling accusations, in a really uncomfortable position. And so for Democrats, it actually may not hurt.
But that's also assuming any lawsuit that may be filed, people automatically start getting things done between now and before session ends in April. Because I can tell you that, and you know this,
it could, but
you know that having worked for Terry Curry,
it could.
Lawsuits filed, somebody's
Consulted.
got easily 30 days to respond, then another 30 days.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You can drag it out as long as you want.
Yeah.
It's a paper game, right? Who can file the most amount of motions to get the other person to have to keep paying lawyers' fees and drag it out. Mm-hmm. And also, I
don't think lawyers' fees are all that bad. By
they're
the way.
not, though. Everyone should get compensated for their job. But I think they haven't filed the civil lawsuit, correct? And they've been talking about it for how long?
No, actually, they would have to go to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission first to get permission to go sue, because, and once again, this gets into the weeds of lawyering. I don't think they have a leg to stand on under the theory that they're filing suit under, because the Attorney General is not an employer. But once again, that's a whole other thing. I guess, but here's a bigger question. Can Republicans go after the Indiana Attorney General? Number one, only African-American statewide elected officials, so there's that dynamic. And number two, they've all been big, giant supporters of Donald Trump, putting their arms around the president when he gets here. With the president's, sort of past history, do those two things alone complicate any sort of impeachment proceedings?
I think this issue absolutely puts Kyle Hupfer in an awkward position, because how can he say that there's a zero tolerance policy for sexual harassment in the GOP, and yet, I mean, where does that leave the president, who's been accused by a number of women? I mean, how do they square that? I mean, how does he get up and introduce the president at a rally, and then shun and return donation from the attorney general? It just doesn't make sense to me.
But that's politics. Look at everyone who bashed Trump and was never a Trumper, and when they needed him at the final hour, they called him in and they hugged on the stage and everything was great.
That's fine, but don't make grand pronouncements that there's a zero tolerance policy.
Well, that's just what I always say. The only thing consistent about politics is inconsistency.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, I hate to use the word optics, but optics are not good here.
You're watching Indiana Issues, coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Our guests today are Lindsey Marie, Adam Wren of Portville, Lara Back, and political talk show host Rob Kendall. Medical marijuana, of course, on a happier note, depending on your perspective. State Representative Jim Lucas plans to introduce legislation that would reform some of the state's marijuana laws, make it legal for medicinal purposes, and even reduce the penalties for less than an ounce. Numbers, 3 more states this past election cycle legalized marijuana for medicinal or recreational purposes. Is it just a matter of time before Indiana has some type of legal marijuana?
You know, an interesting story that I'm reporting right now for Indianapolis Monthly is really kind of a back to the future story. Do you know who the biggest purveyor of medical marijuana was in the state's history?
Who?
Eli Lilly.
Really?
Eli Lilly in the late 1800s and 1930s had marijuana farms in Greenfield and at Conner Prairie. And
Really?
I knew there was a reason I need to get up to
This was on the Conner Prairie tour when you're there with your kids. The third graders.
26 different drugs that they had cannabis extract in it in the until 1939 when they were forced by the government to shut down those farms. So in a lot of ways, they were really ahead of their time.
Yeah.
And in 1907, the actual Eli Lilly, the grandson of Eli Lilly, of Colonel Lilly, did his PhD at the Philadelphia the Philadelphia Society of I can't think of the name, pharmacology, and he did his dissertation on the effects of cannabis on dogs.
I'm looking forward to reading this article.
Yeah,
This sounds really interesting.
We're really kind of
Yeah.
in a back to the future moment where we're coming full circle and
cool.
realizing that there's some medicinal properties of this.
And there's no reason, whether you want to engage in smoking marijuana or whatever, there's no reason that something that doesn't harm you, that has proven benefits for people with PTSD, veterans who have served our nation, people with cancer, people with migraines. If you want to regulate it, fine. That's okay. Let's put some arms around it. But there's no reason those people shouldn't have the right to it. And once again, when Brian Bosma comes out with this moral high horse finger wagging and says everyone's going to end up a drug addict if we legalize this, they just look stupid.
Lindsay, one of the things that folks who oppose legalization have said is, it's one thing to talk about adults, but they worry about. They had a conversation this past week with folks at the Indiana Youth Institute. If you legalize it, you're now telling teenagers and young adults that it's okay. And with Indiana having its issues right now, with the opioid crisis and other addiction issues, they're not quite sure that that's necessarily at this time the best message to send.
Well, when we have issues with opioids or other things, the main issue is actually prohibition that causes it. When you prohibit or make something illegal, or you tell kids they can't do it, they're going to do it. When you look at states where they allow medical marijuana and recreational, and that you look at teen usage, it's completely down. It's sort of the same thing like with alcohol usage. Once you turn 21 or 25, the fun kind of wears off. It's not as fun as it was in high school.
No,
You're
it's
less
actually
like
just like that works better stuff.
To turn 40, it's really
True.
not
I
fun.
mean, good point. But it's
all over at 40.
With prohibition, that's when you start getting to the black market. You get into dangerous areas, and with the kids, if you tell them they can't do it, it's illegal, they're going to do it. Legalize it and make it not cool anymore.
We got just a few minutes left on the program real quick here. I want to make sure we jump into the things. Speaking of tobacco-related products, cigarette taxes. A coalition of groups have called for a $2 per pack increase in the tax on cigarettes. Once again, deal with the effects of smoking with respect to employers. There wasn't a whole lot of support for a cigarette tax the last go-around. Adam Wren, do you see anything changing this next go-around?
I don't see anything changing. I don't think we're going to see movement on this in a direction that resolves the conflict.
Laura?
I think I think curbing smoking is definitely the right thing to do because of the public health aspects to it, as well as the economic aspects to it. But to me, it goes back to the discussion of about the budget, and that when you don't have enough revenue because you're so busy doing corporate welfare, you got to raise cigarette taxes on people so you can bring them extra money. And so I feel like in Indiana, it's like we just constantly kick the can down the road because we don't want to say we raise taxes, and it's that quote unquote sin tax like this. So could move somewhere because of the folks who are behind it. I mean, it's a pretty powerful lobby behind it, and there are a lot of good reasons for it. But again, I mean, we could get mired down in a lot of drama.
Real
Who
quick,
knows?
two things. Number one, why do we tax things differently that are legal? Either it's legal or it's not. If you can do it, why should you be punished for engaging in legal behavior? The second thing is, they have a massive problem, and that is how to fund HIP 2.0 long term. Republicans have bought a heck of a lot of votes with HIP 2.0. They can't let it go under, and they don't have a long-term funding solution for it.
If we can't pay for things, we have a revenue problem, maybe we should stop spending. Instead of taxing everyone, stop freaking spending.
Adam?
He's got new dad brain. He has potential new dad brain over here.
I really struggle to understand why people smoke in the 21st century. That's my.
I do too.
don't
I agree.
understand.
Don't worry, after you come on, new dad, I'll get you a really good cigar.
Okay.
No, it's. I mean, really, from a public health aspect, it's pretty scary.
I'd smoke a cigar with you.
All right, there we go. And it won't be a cheep cigar either that you get at Walgreens. It's not
I'll
a
smoke
Swisher
something
Sweet.
else with you.
Got that too.
We'll go to Michigan.
We go to Michigan. We're going to have the last few minutes of our program. Political predictions. What do you folks see in your political crystal balls? What should folks be paying attention to, whether it's the Indiana General Assembly or the national scene? Lindsey, we'll start with you.
I think the thing everyone should be watching is Timms v. United States, which was just heard by the Supreme Court on Wednesday. It came out of Indiana, and it deals with civil asset forfeiture and excessive
and a lot of
fines.
skeptical judges.
Oh, the oral arguments were hilarious. They took the Solicitor General to the woodshed, essentially. And I have a feeling that they're going to rule in the favor of Timms, and it's going to be a huge win for property rights and civil liberties.
I'm watching South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I think before Christmas we'll see him make an announcement that he's not running for re-election, and I think in January or February we'll see him announce an exploratory committee for the presidency.
I'm watching the national dynamic. It's just so elastic right now. I mean, Mueller is still out there doing his work, so I think it's going to have long-standing repercussions on everyone. I also think the Curtis Hill-Brian Bosma dynamic is absolutely fascinating, and that is going to really define a lot with session.
Sports gambling. I think we saw in 2017 that when alcohol was on the table and you had a groundswell of support behind it, or I'm sorry, 2018, they did as little as humanly possible. They gave the people as little as humanly possible to go, but we addressed it. And we'll see with sports gambling. There's no mainstream opposition to this. The people want it. It's a benefit for the state, but I think the state lawmakers will find a way to screw this up just like they did with Sunday sales.
Did a little bit of alluding to this earlier in the program. I do not expect a civil lawsuit against Indiana Attorney General Curtis Hill to go forward, because under the theory that they're suing under, the courts will say, sorry, you have no cause of action. You're going to have to find another way to do this.
Can I ask you this? What is his long game? What is his long game next year and the year after that?
I think it'll be interesting to see if there's actually if he decides to run for re-election, will there be a convention delegate fight? Mm-hmm. Because the Attorney General is picked at a convention. There will be no superintendent of public instruction, assuming that position is now appointed. So imagine this in 2020: it's Curtis Hill and Eric Holcomb, the only two on stage. And if you really need a way to put this, I'd recommend go renting the movie The Defiant Ones with Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis to get an idea how that relationship is going to look.
And that convention would favor Hill most likely.
Because a lot of the delegates are the more ideologically
Yeah.
based. Those are the people who show up.
Fascinating.
And it's been showing up. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And thank you all for showing up and joining us on the program today. Our guests have been Libertarian Lindsey Marie, Adam Wren of Importantville, Democrat Lara Back, Rob Kendall, political talk show host. Special thanks to all our friends here at the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis for hosting us today. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time on Indiana Issues. And that should be right at about 29 and